The ballroom smelled like roast chicken, cheap champagne, and the kind of perfume women wear when they want the whole room to remember them. I had just taken one step off the dance floor, one breath of relief, when my father's voice cut through the clinking glasses like a hammer on a bell. "There she is," he announced loud enough for the far tables to turn. "Come here, sweetheart, let me introduce you properly." I felt my shoulders tighten before I even faced him. The band kept playing a soft old standard, something my grandparents would have waltzed to, but the music might as well have been mute. All I could hear was him and the familiar dread I'd carried since childhood. He had a circle around him, the groom's relatives from out of state, a couple of my mother's church friends, and people I barely knew, but had still paid good money to feed tonight. My father lifted his glass like he was about to toast. "This," he said, smiling like a man doing a harmless joke, "is my lazy fat daughter." For a heartbeat, the room didn't react. It was too ugly to land cleanly at first. Then a few laughs bubbled up, those nervous, polite ones people do when they don't know what else to do. Someone actually snorted. A woman covered her mouth as if she couldn't help it. My face went hot. I could feel the heat rising from my collarbone into my ears. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stared at the rim of his glass because if I looked at anyone's eyes, I thought I might crumble in front of all of them. My husband Cal was just across the room talking with his best man. He turned when he heard the laughter, his expression shifting from relaxed to confused to sharp concern in a matter of seconds. My father kept going, enjoying the attention like he always did. "Always has been," he added as if he were offering a fun fact. "Wouldn't lift a finger if you paid her." She finally found herself a good man willing to take her on. The laughs grew louder this time, mostly from strangers who didn't know the years behind that sentence. Behind it was every Thanksgiving where he'd pinched my waist in front of my cousins, every Christmas where he'd handed my brother a new tool set and me a diet book with a grin, every family gathering where my mother's silence pressed down like a lid on a boiling pot. My hands shook. I pressed my fingertips into my palm hard enough to hurt, like pain could anchor me. One of Cal's uncles' gray-hair-friendly face gave my father an awkward smile. "Well, she seems lovely," he tried. My father waved him off. "Oh, you don't know her like we do." I heard my own voice before I felt it, thin, strained. "Dad, please." He finally looked at me directly. His eyes were bright with alcohol and something meaner pride, like he'd just proven he still had power over me. "What?" he said, shrugging. "We're all family now, aren't we? It's a joke." The word joke hit me like a slap, because when you've lived with a man like that, everything is a joke until you're bleeding. Cal started walking toward us, but I lifted my hand just slightly without looking at him. Not to stop him forever, just to stop him from making a scene right now. My wedding day had already been a tightrope. I'd begged Cal for something small, something quiet, something we could survive. He'd wanted a big celebration because his family was close and kind, and believed weddings were sacred, joyful things. I wanted to believe that too. But I'd invited my parents anyway, against my better judgment, against my therapist's quiet warning, against the little voice in my gut that had whispered, "Don't hand them a microphone." I'd told myself it was one night I could endure, and then I'd have the marriage I'd always wanted, steady, safe, real. And now my father had turned my reception into his stage. I forced a breath in slow like they taught me years ago when panic threatened to take over. In through the nose, out through the mouth, count to 4. "Excuse me," I managed and stepped back. My heels caught on the edge of the dance floor. I steadied myself and turned toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, hoping I could escape without anyone noticing the way my eyes were suddenly wet. But as I moved away, I caught something that made my steps falter. Cal's groomsmen, his friends, the men standing beside him in matching suits, weren't laughing, not even a little. 3 of them had gone still, faces hardening like a storm front rolling in. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair, had set his drink down so carefully it was as if he didn't trust his hands not to shatter the glass. They were staring at my father. Not with confusion, not with amusement. With recognition. And something else, respect maybe, or anger on my behalf. My throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't only humiliation. It was a sharp, bewildering question. Why are they looking at him like that? I slipped into the hallway, the noise of the reception muffling behind me, and leaned against the wall. The wallpaper was beige and boring, the kind every hotel uses because it offends no one. My eyes burned. A memory hit me so fast it almost stole my breath. I was 13, standing in our kitchen in Ohio, holding a plate of cookies I'd baked from scratch, because I'd heard my father tell my aunt he wished I'd ever do something useful. I'd waited until he came home from work, proud and nervous, and offered him one. He'd taken a bite, chewed, then spit it into the trash. "Too sweet," he'd said, like I'd insulted him, "and you don't need to be eating these anyway." My mother had stood at the sink, hands in soapy water, and said nothing. That night, I'd eaten 3 more cookies alone in my room, not because I wanted them, but because I hated myself and didn't know what else to do with the hurt. People think cruelty is loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's served over dinner, dressed up as concern, handed to you in front of people who pretend not to see. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. "Not tonight," I whispered to myself. "Not tonight." I'd worked too hard to be standing here trembling like a scared girl. I took another breath and tried to steady my thoughts. I wasn't lazy. I hadn't been lazy a day in my life. I'd worked since I was 16, grocery store shifts, after school, diner weekends, summer jobs that left my feet aching. I'd put myself through community college because my parents said they couldn't afford to help, though somehow there was always money for my brother's mistakes. I'd carried weight on my body the way some people carry grief, quietly, stubbornly, and with shame that never truly belonged to me. I'd dieted. I'd tried running. I'd tried all the programs. Some worked for a while. Most didn't. And through it all, I'd still shown up. I'd still done my job. I'd still built a life. But my father's voice had always been louder than my own. I heard footsteps behind me. Cal appeared. His tie loosened, his jaw clenched. "Hey," he said softly, "are you okay?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to smile and make it easy for him. But my throat wouldn't cooperate. "He didn't have to do that," Cal said, anger controlled like a man trying not to explode in public. "I can talk to him." I shook my head, swallowing. "Please, not yet." Cal's eyes searched my face, full of hurt for me. He reached out careful and cupped my cheek. "You don't deserve that, not from anyone." Those words, simple and steady, hit me harder than my father's insult, because I wasn't used to hearing them. Not like that. Behind Cal, one of the groomsmen appeared in the hallway. The broad-shouldered one. He hesitated, then stepped closer, voice low. "Ma'am," he said. The word "ma'am" made my stomach drop in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't politeness. It was formal, familiar. Cal glanced at him, confused. "Mark, what's going on?" Mark didn't look at Cal. His eyes were on me, and there was something in them that felt like a salute without the hand motion. "Ma'am," he said again, quieter, "are you all right?" I stared at him, my mind scrambling. "I'm fine," I lied automatically. Mark's mouth tightened. "With respect, you don't have to be fine." Cal looked between us. "Do you two know each other?" Mark's gaze flicked toward the ballroom entrance, where my father's laughter still floated faintly through the doors. His expression turned cold. "We know who she is," he said. I felt the hallway tilt slightly, like I was standing on the edge of something I hadn't seen coming. "What do you mean?" Cal asked, voice rising just a touch. Mark took a slow breath, as if choosing his words carefully. "I mean, your father-in-law is about to learn something tonight that he should have known a long time ago." My heart pounded. "Mark, why?" He interrupted gently, not unkind. "Ma'am, you taught us to speak up when something's wrong. You taught us that silence is how good people lose. So, if you'll allow it, we're going to speak." And as he said it, 2 more groomsmen appeared behind him, faces set with the same quiet resolve. I stood there, trembling, the taste of humiliation still sharp in my mouth, yet for the first time in my life I felt something else rising beneath it. Not revenge exactly. Truth. And truth, I was learning, could be louder than cruelty. Part 1. The Wedding Day. Humiliation. 1:45 words. Continue. I grew up in a small Ohio town where people believed hard work solved everything, and silence kept families together. Our house sat on a cracked concrete street lined with maples that dropped leaves like rusted coins every fall. From the outside, we looked solid. My father worked, my mother cooked. We went to church on Sundays. Neighbors waved. Inside, though, words were weapons, and my father never left home without one in his hand. He wasn't a drunk when I was young. That came later. Back then he was sharp, loud, and certain he was right. He believed children were shaped by pressure like steel, and if you bent the wrong way, that was your own fault. My brother was his pride. Thin, quick-talking, always promising something big. When my brother failed, it was bad luck. When I failed or even hesitated, it was proof. Lazy, my father would say, leaning back in his chair after dinner. That's your problem. I was 8 the first time I remember him saying it. I'd forgotten to take the trash out. He said it like a diagnosis, not a complaint, as if he were naming a disease he'd already decided was terminal. I learned early that effort didn't matter as much as perception. I could clean the kitchen, help my mother finish my homework, and still hear, "You didn't do it right." Or worse, nothing at all. Silence was its own verdict. By middle school, my body began to change in ways my father didn't approve of. I wasn't delicate, I wasn't willowy. I was built solid like the women on my mother's side. Strong hips, broad shoulders, the kind of body meant to carry weight. Groceries, babies, responsibility. My father treated it like a personal offense. "You don't need seconds," he'd say at the table in front of everyone. "Are you sure you want to wear that? No man wants a woman who can't control herself?" My mother would flinch sometimes, open her mouth, then close it again. Later, she'd knock on my bedroom door and say softly, "He doesn't mean it. He worries about you." That was her favorite sentence, "He doesn't mean it." But he did, he always did. Food became complicated. I ate when I was anxious. I ate when I was ashamed. I ate because it was one of the few comforts that didn't talk back. And every pound I gained became another exhibit in my father's case against me. By high school, I was working evenings at a grocery store bagging items for neighbors who pretended not to recognize me when my father was around. I saved money in a jar under my bed. Not for anything special, just in case. In case I needed to leave. College was never discussed seriously. My father said we couldn't afford it. My brother still managed to get loans, co-signed money, sent mistakes forgiven. When I brought home a pamphlet for community college, my father scoffed. "What for?" he said. "So you can quit halfway and come crying home." That night I filled out the application anyway. Community college was my first taste of quiet dignity. No one knew my family. No one commented on my body. Professors cared whether I showed up and did the work, and I did, relentlessly. I studied logistics, operations, systems, things that made sense, things where effort led to results. I worked 2 jobs and took night classes. When I graduated, my parents didn't come to the ceremony. My mother sent a card. My father said, "Now what?" Now what turned into a job with long hours and low pay. Then another. Then a decision that scared me enough to finally feel alive. I joined. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. And it definitely wasn't something my father bragged about to his friends. But it gave me something I'd never had before: structure that didn't humiliate me. Training was brutal. Not because I was weak, but because people assumed I was. Men twice my size smirked when they saw me. Instructors watched me like they were waiting for me to break. I didn't. I learned to move through pain without advertising it. I learned to listen more than I spoke. I learned that leadership wasn't about being loud, it was about being steady. There were moments late at night when I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, my father's voice echoing in my head. Lazy, fat, not enough. And every morning I got up anyway. Years passed. Slowly. Earned. I didn't tell my parents much. Every phone call turned into criticism or awkward silence. Promotions happened. Responsibilities grew. I took on roles others didn't want: hard assignments, broken teams, thankless situations. I discovered something important: people don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be fair. I never asked anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. I listened. I protected my people. And when they failed, I corrected them without shaming. It was everything I'd wished for as a child offered to others. When I met Cal, I didn't tell him everything at first. Just pieces. He saw me as I was, not as my father's disappointment, but as a woman who had survived and built something solid. He liked my laugh. He didn't comment on my body unless it was to say I was beautiful, which took me years to believe he meant. He proposed on a quiet evening at home, no audience, no speeches, just a ring, trembling hands, and a promise. I hesitated before inviting my parents. Not because I wanted revenge, because some small, stubborn part of me still hoped. Hoped my father would see me standing there grown and steady and realize he'd been wrong. Standing in that hallway at my wedding hearing, Mark called me ma'am, feeling the weight of years pressing against the present, I realized something painful and freeing all at once. My father's opinion had shaped me, but it didn't own me anymore. The people who mattered already knew who I was. And the ones who didn't were about to learn. I didn't set out to prove my father wrong. That's the part people always get backward. I wasn't fueled by spite or some grand vision of payback. I was fueled by something quieter and more stubborn, the need to build a life where my worth wasn't up for debate every day. After training, my first real assignment dropped me into a world that ran on rules, hierarchy, and accountability. It was a place where expectations were written down, not implied, and where performance mattered more than charm. That alone felt like oxygen. I was surrounded by men who assumed I'd be gone within a year. Some were polite about it, others weren't. One of them, older seasoned, told me flat out, "You don't look like command material." I nodded and thanked him for his honesty. Then I outworked him. I learned every system until I could troubleshoot them half asleep. I memorized protocols and procedures because preparation was the one thing no one could take from me. When mistakes happened, and they always did, I owned mine immediately. No excuses, no tears. That earned me something rare: trust. Leadership didn't come quickly. It never does when you don't fit the picture in people's heads. But responsibility crept up on me in small ways. Someone asked my opinion. Someone followed my call without questioning it. Someone else asked me to handle a situation because, in their words, you're calm under pressure. Calm under pressure. I smiled the first time I heard it because pressure was the language of my childhood. I'd been fluent in it since I was 8 years old. The first time I was put in charge of a small unit, I barely slept the night before. Not because I doubted my competence, but because I felt the weight of other people's livelihoods resting on my decisions. These weren't numbers on a page. They were families' futures' lives. I remembered how powerless I'd felt growing up, how one careless sentence from my father could ruin an entire week. I swore I would never lead that way. I set clear expectations. I listened more than I spoke. I corrected privately and praised publicly. When someone struggled, I asked why before I asked how fast they could fix it. It wasn't soft, it was effective. Over the years, assignments grew more complex. The hours got longer, the stakes rose. I spent holidays away from home, birthdays in unfamiliar places, quiet nights staring out at runways or motor pools or gray stretches of water, thinking about the strange path that had brought me there. I didn't call my parents often. When I did, the conversations were brief. My father would ask what I was up to now, his tone always edged with disbelief, like he was waiting for the part where I admitted I'd failed. I never gave him that satisfaction. I didn't brag. I didn't correct him when he made assumptions. Part of me wanted to. A bigger part knew it wouldn't matter. He wasn't listening for truth, he was listening for confirmation of the story he'd already decided to tell. Promotion came quietly, like most good things do. A meeting, a signature, a handshake. No parade, no applause. Just more responsibility and a heavier badge. The day I officially stepped into a senior leadership role, one of my former subordinates, now a peer, pulled me aside. "You know," he said a little awkwardly, "a lot of people don't see this coming. But none of us are surprised." I asked him what he meant. He shrugged. "You don't make it about you. That's rare." That night alone in my quarters, I cried. Not from joy, exactly. From relief. From the strange, deep release of being seen without having to beg for it. It was around that time that Mark came under my command. He was experienced, capable, and blunt, the kind of man who respected competence and had no patience for posturing. We butted heads at first, not because he questioned my authority, but because he challenged my decisions the way professionals should. We talked things through. We found common ground. Over time, he became one of my most reliable people. When Cal introduced me to his friends years later, I hadn't connected the dots at first. Mark was older, broader now, his hair threaded with gray. It wasn't until he looked at me with that familiar, attentive focus that I recognized him. We didn't acknowledge it then. That wasn't the place. But later, he'd pulled Cal aside and said, "You know who you're marrying, right?" Cal had smiled. "I do." I never told my parents any of this. Not because I was ashamed, but because my life wasn't an argument to be won. It was something I lived day by day with intention and care. When Cal and I started planning the wedding, he wanted to invite everyone. He believed families healed best when they were brought into the light. I admired that about him. Sometimes I even believed it. I told him about my father in pieces, enough to prepare him, not enough to scare him away. He offered more than once to limit their role, to set boundaries, to protect me. I told him I could handle it. What I didn't say, what I barely admitted to myself, was that some small, stubborn part of me still wanted my father to look at me and finally understand. Standing in that hallway after Mark and the others had stepped forward, I realized how fragile that hope had been all along. My father didn't know me, not really. But the men in that room did. They knew my standards, my patience, my refusal to humiliate even when it would have been easier. They knew the woman I'd become, not the girl my father had tried to freeze in time. And as the doors to the ballroom swung open and the noise rushed back in, I felt something settle in my chest. Whatever happened next, I wasn't walking back in alone. I had told myself 100 times that inviting my parents was the right thing to do. That's what people like me say when we're trying to outrun an old ache with good intentions. We call it forgiveness. We call it maturity. We call it being the bigger person. Sometimes it's all of that. Sometimes it's just hope wearing a sensible coat. When Cal and I first talked about the guest list, I hesitated at my parents' names. I stared at the screen cursor, blinking like it was waiting for me to make a decision that would ripple backward through my entire life. "You don't have to," Cal said gently, reading my silence the way he always did. "We can keep it small." I shook my head. "No, I want them there." That wasn't entirely true. What I wanted was different. I wanted my father to sit in a room full of witnesses and behave like a decent man for once. I wanted my mother to smile without flinching. I wanted a photograph where everyone looked like they belonged. Mostly I wanted closure, or something close enough to it that I could pretend. Cal didn't push. He never did. He trusted me to know my limits even when I wasn't sure I did. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, my mother called more than usual. She asked about the menu, the flowers, the seating arrangements. She sounded nervous, eager, like a woman preparing for an inspection. "Your father's been telling everyone about the wedding," she said once. "He's proud." I didn't ask proud of what. My father, for his part, made only one comment when I called to confirm the date. "You sure you want to spend that kind of money on a party?" I told him yes. He snorted. "Must be nice." That was the closest thing to a compliment I'd ever get. On the day of the wedding, I woke up before dawn. Not from nerves, those came later, but from habit. Years of early mornings had trained my body to rise quietly alert, ready. The hotel room was still and dim. My dress hung by the window, soft and unassuming, exactly what I wanted. I wasn't trying to be a different woman for one day. I wanted to look like myself, comfortable, grounded, real. When my parents arrived at the venue, I saw them from across the room. My father was already holding a drink. My mother hovered close to him, her smile, tight eyes scanning the space like she was bracing for impact. I hugged her first. She smelled like the same powder she'd worn my entire life. "You look beautiful," she whispered. My father kissed my cheek, his breath sharp with alcohol even then. Well, he said looking me up and down cleaned up nice. I chose to hear it as neutral. The ceremony itself was everything I'd hoped for. Quiet. Honest. When Cal took my hands, his thumbs brushing my knuckles, I felt steady. Present. The words we spoke weren't grand, but they were true. I meant every one of mine. At the reception, I worked the room the way I'd been trained to work any space, calm, observant, mindful of where people were and how they felt. I checked on guests. I thanked servers. I smiled until my cheeks ached. My father drank. I noticed it the way you notice a storm building on the horizon. Not panicked yet, just alert. He got louder as the evening wore on. His jokes sharpened. His laughter stretched a little too long. People leaned away without realizing they were doing it. My mother tried to slow him down. I saw her touch his arm, murmur something. He waved her off. When the band started playing and people moved toward the dance floor, I let myself relax just a little. Cal and I danced. The room blurred at the edges in that pleasant, unreal way joy sometimes brings. Then I stepped off the floor to catch my breath. And my father found his moment. Standing there in the hallway afterward, I realized something with a clarity that surprised me. I hadn't invited my parents because I thought they would change. I'd invited them because I wanted to know once and for all whether they could. That was the real test, not for them, for me. When Mark spoke to me, when he said we're going to speak, a part of me wanted to stop him. Old habits die hard. Don't make it worse. Don't draw attention. Don't provoke. But another part, the part I'd spent years strengthening, knew this wasn't provocation. It was correction. We walked back into the ballroom together. The music had softened, conversations breaking into small clusters. My father was still at the center of one, retelling something with exaggerated gestures. He hadn't noticed my absence at all. Mark didn't raise his voice. None of them did. They didn't need to. Sir Mark said, standing tall but respectful, "May we have a moment?" My father turned surprised, then amused. "Sure," he said, grinning. "What is it?" I stood beside Cal, my heart pounding, my hands steady. Mark gestured to the other groomsmen. They stepped forward, not aggressively but deliberately. The room shifted. People sensed something was happening. Mark looked my father in the eye. "You introduced her as your lazy, fat daughter." My father laughed, once short and dismissive. "Just a joke." "It wasn't," Mark said evenly. "And we're not laughing." Silence spread outward, table by table. "She's the reason most of us are standing here today," another groomsman added. "She led us. She protected us. She held us to a standard and never humiliated us for failing." My father's smile faltered. Mark took a breath. "Sir, she's our boss." You could hear the air leave my father's lungs, his glass-tipped wine sloshing over his hand as he sputtered, coughing, red-faced. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." My mother stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, my father had no words. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't expected at all. Not triumph. Relief. The silence didn't last long, but it changed everything. At first, there was only the sound of my father coughing, struggling to recover his breath as he wiped red wine from his chin with the back of his hand. His eyes darted from Mark to the other groomsmen, then finally to me. For the first time that night, and maybe the first time in my life, he looked unsure. Someone near the bar let out a nervous laugh and immediately stopped. A few guests shifted in their seats. Forks hovered over plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. My father straightened his jacket, trying to regain the ground he'd lost. "Now hold on," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Boss? What kind of boss?" Mark didn't answer right away. He waited the way I'd taught him to, long enough for the other person to hear their own words echo back at them. "Our commanding officer," he said finally, "for years." Another groomsman stepped forward. She signed off on our assignments. She reviewed our reports. She took responsibility when things went wrong. And when things went right, a third added, she gave credit where it was due. My father's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at my mother as if she might rescue him. She didn't. Her face had gone pale, her hands twisting in the fabric of her dress. That's not what she told us," my father muttered. I felt Cal's hand tighten around mine. I could feel his pulse through his skin, steady and grounding. I took a step forward. "I didn't tell you," I said, my voice calm despite the pounding in my chest, "because you never asked." The words landed softly, but they carried. My father frowned, confused, defensive. "I asked what you were doing." "No," I said. "You asked what I was doing wrong." A murmur rippled through the room. Not applause, not condemnation, recognition. My father shook his head. "This is ridiculous." "You're exaggerating. She's always been." "Enough," Cal said, his voice firm but controlled. Everyone turned to him. My husband, my partner, the man who had watched me doubt myself and had never once used it against me. "She's always been what he asked. Capable, steady kind." My father bristled. "You don't know her like we do." Cal didn't raise his voice. "I know her better than anyone in this room. And I know this: she didn't earn her position because someone felt sorry for her. She earned it because people trusted her with their lives. That did it." My father's shoulders sagged just slightly. The bravado leaked out of him like air from a punctured tire. He looked around, realizing he'd lost the room. I saw something else in his eyes then. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of the story he'd been telling himself for decades, unraveling in public. He cleared his throat. "Well," he said weakly, "if that's true. I suppose I underestimated her. Underestimated, as if it were a math problem, not a lifetime. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze. "You didn't underestimate me," I said. "You ignored me." The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the lights overhead. "I didn't become who I am to embarrass you," I continued. "I became who I am because I had to. Because I learned early that no one was coming to save me." My father swallowed. "I invited you here because I wanted you to see me," I said. "Not as a joke, not as a warning, just as your daughter." My mother let out a small sound beside him. A sob quickly stifled. My father looked at her, then back at me. His voice came out rough. "You should have told us." I shook my head slowly. "You should have listened." That was it. No dramatic speech, no shouting, no victory lap. Just the truth standing on its own. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mark stepped back, giving the room back to us. The groomsmen followed, returning to their places as quietly as they'd come forward. The bandleader cleared his throat and murmured something to his musicians. Soft music resumed, tentative at first, then steadier. People began to breathe again. A few guests came over, offering awkward congratulations, quick pats on my arm, looks of admiration mixed with discomfort. I thanked them and let them drift away. My father sat down heavily at the table, staring into his empty glass. My mother reached for my hand. I didn't know she whispered, tears in her eyes. I squeezed her fingers gently. "I know." That wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was honesty. Cal leaned down and kissed my temple. "You okay?" I nodded, and for once it wasn't a lie. As the evening wound down, I watched my father from a distance. He didn't drink anymore. He didn't speak much either. He just sat there quiet, like a man finally hearing the echo of his own words for the first time. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel satisfaction. I felt lighter. Because revenge, I was learning, didn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looked like truth delivered calmly and left to do its work. The wedding ended without fireworks. No one stormed out. No glasses shattered. No dramatic exit for my father. No tearful collapse for my mother. Life, stubborn and ordinary, resumed its pace the way it always does, quietly, imperfectly. That I would later realize was what made the moment real. The next morning, Cal and I sat in the small breakfast area of the hotel, sunlight slanting across white tablecloths and half-empty coffee cups. He reached for my hand the way he always did, casual grounding, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You handled that with more grace than anyone I know," he said. I shrugged. I didn't know what else to do. "That's the thing," he replied. "You always do." After breakfast, my parents knocked on our door. I knew it was them before Cal even reached for the handle. Something in my chest tightened, old instinct stirring. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail the way I had so many times before. But this wasn't a phone call. This was a reckoning I'd already stepped into. My father stood in the hallway, hands clasped, shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen. He looked older than he had the night before, like someone had turned down the volume on him. My mother stood beside him, eyes red, clutching her purse. "We don't want to stay long," she said quickly. We thought we should talk." Cal squeezed my hand once and stepped back. "I'll give you some space," he said, then disappeared into the bedroom. The silence between us stretched. My father cleared his throat. "I embarrassed you," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing either. "Yes," I replied. He winced, as if the simple agreement hurt more than an argument would have. "I didn't know," he said again, softer this time. "About your work. About any of it." I leaned against the doorframe. "That's not the same as saying you were wrong." My mother inhaled sharply, but my father nodded slowly. I was wrong. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd never practiced. "I thought pushing you would make you tougher," he continued. "That if I stayed on you, you wouldn't fail." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You didn't push me," I said. "You diminished me." He looked at the floor. "For years," I went on, "I thought, if I just worked harder, ate less, stayed quieter, you'd finally be proud. Do you know what that does to a kid?" My father's jaw tightened. "I never meant—" "I know," I said gently, "but intent doesn't erase impact." That was something I'd learned the hard way, something I'd later teach others. You can love someone and still hurt them deeply. You can believe you're helping and still leave scars. My mother stepped forward, tears slipping free. I should have said something, she whispered. I should have stopped him. Yes, I said, you should have. She nodded, crying openly now. I was afraid. I didn't want to make things worse. I took her hand. Silence makes things worse. We stood there like that for a long moment, 3 adults carrying the weight of decades, none of us sure what came next. My father spoke again. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I don't even know how to fix this. I considered him the man who had shaped so much of my fear, and in a strange way, so much of my strength. I'm not asking you to fix the past, I said. I'm asking you to stop repeating it. He nodded slowly. I can try. It wasn't a promise, but it was honest. They left shortly after that. No hugs, no dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. In the weeks that followed, my father called once, then twice. The conversations were awkward, careful, like learning to walk on a mended bone. He asked real questions. He listened more than he spoke. When he slipped, and he did, I corrected him calmly. For the first time, he didn't laugh it off. My mother sent letters, long ones, pages filled with things she'd never said aloud, regret, love, fear. I read them slowly, answering when I could. Not everything healed, some wounds don't, but something important changed the power dynamic. I was no longer a child waiting for approval. I was a woman setting terms. One evening, months later, my father said something that stayed with me. I told a guy at work about you, he said. About what you do. I braced myself. I didn't make it a joke, he added quietly. That was enough. Revenge stories often end with someone crushed, humiliated, destroyed. That's what people expect. But real life, especially for those of us who've lived long enough to know better, rarely works that way. Sometimes the greatest victory is being heard without raising your voice. Sometimes it's watching someone finally confront themselves. And sometimes it's choosing peace without pretending the pain never existed. I didn't need my father to become a different man overnight. I needed him to stop hurting me to feel powerful. And for the first time, he did. Time has a way of sanding down sharp edges, not by erasing them, but by teaching you how to run your fingers along them without bleeding. A year passed after the wedding, then another. Life settled into something steady and good. Cal and I built routines the way older couples do, quiet mornings, shared errands, long conversations that wandered from serious to silly and back again. We learned when to speak and when to simply sit together, which I'd come to believe was its own kind of wisdom. My relationship with my parents didn't transform into a picture-perfect ending. It became something more realistic, something earned. My father never became gentle overnight. He was still blunt, still awkward, still prone to saying the wrong thing. But when he did, he stopped himself. Or he called later and said I shouldn't have said that. And every time he did, it felt like a small but meaningful repair. My mother changed too. She spoke more. She asked questions she'd never dared to before. Sometimes she apologized for things that weren't even her fault, but I understood what she was trying to say. She was learning how to be present instead of quiet. I didn't carry the illusion that we were fixed. I carried something better, clarity. One afternoon, my father came to visit. He sat at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring out the window. After a long silence, he said, I spent most of my life thinking respect was something you demanded. I waited. Turns out, he continued, voice low, it's something you earn, and it's easy to lose. I nodded, it is. He looked at me then, not like a critic, not like a judge, but like a man finally seeing the cost of his own words. I don't know if I can make up for everything he said. You don't have to, I replied, just don't pass it on. That mattered to him, I could tell. As the years went on, I found myself thinking often about the people who might be listening to this story, people who had lived long enough to know that family love can be complicated, that regret doesn't always come with a roadmap, and that it's never too late to learn something important. Here's what I know now and what I wish someone had told me sooner. Words last longer than you think. Children remember the tone more than the intention. And respect once broken takes patience, not pride, to rebuild. If you're a parent listening to this, I hope you understand something deeply. Your child's worth is not measured by their body, their speed, or how closely they mirror your expectations. The words you use become the voice they carry into adulthood. Choose them carefully. If you're a son or daughter who's been dismissed, mocked, or underestimated, I want you to hear this clearly. Your value does not require their approval. It never did. You are allowed to build a life that feels safe, dignified, and whole, even if the people who raised you don't understand it right away. And if you're someone standing at the edge of reconciliation, unsure whether it's worth the risk, remember this: reconciliation doesn't mean forgetting. It means telling the truth and deciding what comes next. My wedding didn't end the way I imagined it would, but it gave me something better than revenge. It gave me my voice. And it reminded me that real strength isn't loud, it doesn't humiliate, it doesn't need an audience. Real strength listens, real strength learns, and sometimes real strength says I was wrong and chooses to do better. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred a memory, a regret, or a hope, I invite you to reflect on it, share it with someone who might need it, or stay with us for more stories like this. Stories about family dignity and the quiet courage it takes to grow at any age.